Hi, folks. In this next story, you are reading from E.M. Forster. You're reading The Machine Stops, and you have already read many pieces of science fiction from the 50s and 60s that were in that post-war era in reaction to, all of the technological advances, anxieties, and fears related to robotics and AI. Now, our theme of the week is technology and the machine, which is adjacent to artificial intelligence and robots, but certainly carries sort of different considerations for us to think about. And we're backtracking in the timeline to start with Ian Forster's The Machine Stops. Now, this story was published in 1909, so, it's over a century old at this point. And the context and background for this period of time, Ian Forster is an English author, and during this sort of turn of the century, as we move from 1800s to 1900s, we're going through the Industrial Revolution. So, the manufacturing technology is advancing. We're seeing a lot of machine advancements in the world, in society, in industry, in everyday life. And as with any technological development, people become anxious about the influence of those things in our life and our dependence on them, our relationship with them, our interrelatedness with them. And this was something that Ian Forster is definitely engaging with in this story. I think this story is particularly interesting to think about in terms of being a century old. There is a case to be made that oftentimes science fiction and fantasy writers are eerily accurate at predicting what something may, or what the future may hold in a more conceptual way. Now, at the turn of the century, you have the Industrial Revolution going on. You also have a lot of popularity coming from science fiction because of the Industrial Revolution. So some of the most sort of iconic science fiction writers, H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, they are writing in this period of time. H.G. Wells, The Time Machine, I believe, was 1898. So there's a big popularity in these sorts of stories that is associated with the turn of the century. Now, E.M. Forster's story deals with isolation and this sort of dystopian future that questions our relationship with each other and our relationship with technology and our humanness in a similar way to our stories on robotics and artificial intelligence did. Now, E.M. Forster would go on to be a part of what is often referred to as the golden age of science fiction, which is the 20s and 30s, where you had a lot of popularity of these pulp stories that were published in pulp magazines. And so this is one of his earlier pieces, but also one of his more famous pieces. And these writers were pulling from, there was a big, the modernist movement takes shape in the 20s, at least in American literature, and this modernization also influences science fiction in a really interesting way. Now, about 40 years after the story was published, Ian Forster did write that it was a reaction to a story by H.G. Wells, The Time Machine. And in The Time Machine, you have humanity has evolved into sort of two different races. The elite live above ground and sort of don't have to worry about anything. They live in a very utopian ideal. And then you have the Morlocks, who are the sort of a reflection of the laboring and working class that live underground and basically supply everything that the elite need to, for their day-to-day life. And it's interesting to think about in terms of that story and that sort of dystopian idea about class structure. So at the turn of the century, one of the hallmarks of the years leading up to 1900, and as we move into the 1900s, is this massive wealth inequality. So this is before there are really labor laws. This is before there are unions. This is before there is a lot of regulation. You have child labor, things like that. And for people that were working in industrial, factories and things like that, it was a really rough, impoverished life. However, this is also the era of the Carnegies and the Vanderbilts. And, the people were becoming essentially the equivalent of billionaires off of these industrialized labor practices. So Ian Forster is engaging with that and looking at what the experience of that would be, while also looking at what is the ultimate driving force of that metaphor. And in the case of this story, it is the machine. I look forward to seeing what you all think of this one.